Chapter 69, Khaybar. The truce with Mecca made it possible to concentrate on the dangers to the north. The greatest of these was the oasis of Khaybar, populated by Jews who were, for the most part, implacably hostile to Islam. The sorcerer Labid had almost certainly been bribed from there, though that might have been the act of an individual. But there were far more substantial reasons to take action against the exiled Banu Nadir and their Khaybarite kinsmen. It was unlikely they would march on Yathrib, but they had given Quraysh every encouragement to attack during the Battle of the Trench, and their influence had induced their Ghatafan allies to take Quraysh's side. Through them, Ghatafan remained in a virtual state of war with Medina. As long as Khaybar remained untouched, Medina could never enjoy full security. The time had come. The Prophet was convinced that the near victory promised in recent revelation, a victory rich in spoils, must refer to Khaybar. But this would not be a triumph shared by all who claimed to follow Islam. Revelation had already shown that the desert tribes who refused to participate in the lesser pilgrimage had been motivated by purely mercenary considerations. Since no booty had been expected in that expedition, they had stayed behind. Now they were not to be allowed to partake in this rich campaign. This meant a smaller force would march, but that had the advantage of secrecy. Even when news began to circulate, many dismissed it as a joke. Khaybar's fortress was legendary. Quraysh and others hoped the rumor was true, that Muhammad would finally face a crushing defeat, but feared it could not be, for they knew he was no fool. The Jews of Khaybar, confident in their walls and allies, dismissed the rumors outright. Only when confirmation came from Medina that the Prophet was preparing to march did Kinana, their de facto leader, travel to Ghatafan and offer them half the year's date harvest in return for reinforcements. They agreed to send 4,000 men. The Jews themselves were in the habit of donning armor daily, lining up their 10,000 fighting men. With Ghatafan, they would total 14,000. The Muslim force, a mere 1,600 men. Before setting out, a man of AWs named Abu Abs came to the Prophet with a problem. He had a camel, but nothing else, not even provisions or clothes for the journey. The Prophet gave him a long cloak. A few days into the march, he noticed Abu Abs was wearing a poorer garment and asked where the cloak had gone. Abu Abs explained, "I sold it for 8 dirhams, bought dates for myself, left 2 dirhams with my family, and bought this cloak for 4. The Prophet laughed. "O father of Abs, you and your companions are truly poor. But by him in whose hand is my soul, if you live a little longer, you will have so many provisions and possessions that it will not be good for you." At one camp, the Prophet halted and called on Ibn al-Aqwa, a man of Islam with a beautiful voice, to sing camel songs, rhythmic, haunting chants that motivated the beasts and the riders. Ibn al-Aqwa sang a verse the Prophet had once taught during the digging of the trench. "God, but for thee, we never had been guided, never had given alms, nor prayed thy prayer." When he finished, the Prophet said, "God have mercy on you." Umar objected, "You've made it inevitable, O Messenger of God. Would that we had enjoyed him longer." They understood from experience that such words from the Prophet often meant death was near. After 2.5 days' march, they camped just outside Khaybar. The Prophet selected a route that placed them between the town and its Ghatafan allies. At dawn, the Muslim army silently surveyed Khaybar's fortresses and fields. The locals, unaware of their arrival, only discovered them when they emerged for work. "Muhammad and his host!" they cried in panic and fled. The Prophet proclaimed, "Allahu Akbar! Khaybar is crushed," playing on the name Kharibat Khaybar. He then recited, "When it alights in front of their dwellings, bad morning then to those who have been warned. Surah Al-Safat 37:177. But instead of it alights, he said, we alight, placing himself and the believers as the instruments of divine punishment. The Jews debated what to do. Some advised uniting forces for a decisive battle, but most opted to remain in their separate strongholds. This disunity played into the Muslims' hands. Revelation had described such division before. Ill feeling is rife among them. You count them as one whole, but their hearts are divided. Surah Al-Hashr 59:14. The Muslims, by contrast, were, as the Quran described, those who fight in ranks as if they were a solid wall. Surah Al-Saf 61 verse 4. And how many a little band has overcome a multitude by God's leave. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:249. The Prophet began with the weakest fortress, based on intelligence gathered from a captured spy. They soon seized engines of war from it, a ballista and 2 testudos, siege shelters. These helped them take other fortresses more easily. At Nam, however, the defenders launched a strong counterattack and repulsed all assaults. That evening the Prophet declared, "Tomorrow I shall give the banner to a man who loves God and his messenger, and by whom God will grant us victory." He handed it to Allah. With prayers for victory, Allah led the final charge with Zubair and Abu Dujana, famed for his red turban. They drove back the defenders and captured the gates. And where were Ghatafan? They had set out with 4,000 men, but returned in panic after a mysterious nighttime voice cried 3 times, "Your people! Your people! Your people!" They feared for their homes, found them safe, but were unwilling to march again. The strongest fortress was Al-Qamus, belonging to the Banu Nadir clan of Kinana. It sat atop a rock outcrop, steep and well defended. The Muslims cut off its underground water supply with the help of a defecting Jew. After 3 days, the defenders emerged and were defeated. Kinana sued for peace. The Prophet agreed to let the garrison leave in safety, with the condition that if anyone hid property, the amnesty would be revoked. Soon after, evidence emerged of hidden treasure. Kinana lied, saying it had been spent on war, but his own tribesmen exposed the truth. He and a cousin were executed. Their families were taken captive. The remaining forts surrendered. The Jews proposed staying in Khaybar as tenant farmers, offering half the produce. The Prophet agreed, adding that he could expel them later if necessary. Meanwhile, news of this spread to Fadak, another rich oasis. Its Jews offered surrender on identical terms. Since Fadak was not conquered in battle, it became personal property of the Prophet, to be distributed as he wished. At one feast, the widow of Salam ibn Mishkam poisoned a lamb and served it to the Prophet. A companion named Bishr, seated next to him, also took a bite. The Prophet spat out his mouthful, saying, "Stop! This shoulder has told me it is poisoned." Bishr later died. The woman confessed, explaining that the Prophet had killed her father, husband, and uncle. She reasoned, "If he is a king, I will be rid of him. If he is a prophet, he will know." The Prophet forgave her. Among the captives was Safiya, the daughter of Huyay, killed after the Battle of the Trench, and widow of Kinana. She had married him only recently, and it had not been a happy union. Deeply religious, Safiya had long believed Muhammad to be the awaited prophet. Once, as a child, she had overheard her father and uncle return from Quba, visibly shaken by their meeting with him. Not long before Khaybar, she had dreamt of a moon falling into her lap, and when she told Kinana, he struck her, accusing her of desiring the king of the Hijaz. Dihya al-Kalb, a companion known for his beauty, had asked that Safiya be given to him as his share of the booty. But upon hearing her dream, the Prophet offered Dihya her cousin instead. Then he gave Safiya the choice, "Remain with your people, or embrace Islam and marry me?" She replied, "I choose God and His Messenger." They were married at the first halt on the return journey. Before returning directly, the Prophet turned slightly westward and besieged Wada al-Qura, another allied Jewish settlement. After 3 days, they surrendered on the same terms. During the Khaybar campaign, Ibn al-Aqwa, the singer, was killed when his own sword turned against him. One man said he could not be a martyr. The Prophet replied, "He lies who says so. Ibn al-Aqwa passes through paradise like a swimmer through water." Another question arose when Karkara, the Prophet's black slave, was killed by an arrow while unloading a camel. But the Prophet said, "He is burning now in hell under a cloak he stole at Khaybar." The Prophet was constant in reminding his people that proximity to him was not a guarantee of salvation. On the contrary, they bore greater responsibility. "You are in a time when if a man omits 1/10 of what is commanded, he is doomed. But a time will come when if a man observes 1/10, he will be saved." Tirmidh, 2316.